buzzing through the walls, making their honey and singing their song. They say I worked for the queen all day. Yeah, I worked for the queen all day. Yeah.
Hello, the hive. Hello, the queen bee's hive. I should say, I got to start saying that because this is different than the hive over on Outlander cast. Hi, everyone. Sorry it's taking me a few days to get this chapter up, a couple days. It's a big chapter. Oh, my God, but a fan-freaking-tastic chapter. One was I give it 5++ honey pots and all the good stuff. So many feels from this chapter, from humor, to heartbreak, to surprise, tenderness, warmth. This title also just a lot of information. The title fits because we have all kinds of visits from all types in this chapter, and we even discuss in it how to build a privy to minimize germs from sick visitors. Then we finally get to a moment of truth with Roger and Jenny, which ended a little less momentous than I imagined, or that I think we all imagined to some extent, as far as her reaction. You know, we thought it was going to be a shock to her, but she was the blow was softened. But it was still so tender and sweet that I just loved it. But what we also get is a scene with Roger and Jamie, an incredible scene, one of my favorite relationships, with a super heart-wrenching moment, and heartwarming also moment in this chapter. The word visitations also conjures the idea of ghosts and those that are dead from your past coming to see you, you know. And we certainly get that as well in this chapter, both literally with Brian's ghost being felt there, and figuratively with Roger and Jamie and Jamie and Jenny and Jenny and Roger at the end, kind of revisiting the ghosts of their past, revisiting memories. So there's a lot packed into the word visitations in this chapter. So this dense chapter of day 2, after the Mac's arrival. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get all this done in one post. It's a lot of pages that I have. So I am going to maybe be splitting this into an A-B. We'll see how I do. So this dense chapter of day 2, after the Mac's arrival, opens with a catechism starting at mid-afternoon of a day in the life of Jamie and Claire. You know, Claire, the backwoods healer, and all her weird assortment of ills and injuries, including a broken toe from kicking a mule. The guy kicked a mule and broke his toe from it, and a bite from a pissed-off raccoon. So these are the types of things Surgeon Claire, you know, from Boston is dealing with in her normal everyday. And Jamie had been working on the new house, and as visitors came all day, curious about the new Macs that have arrived, women would stay with Claire to get all the scoop, and the men would go off with Jamie to check out his progress and to slot a time where they could come and help him. So by the end of the day, Jamie has enough helping hands slotted over the next couple weeks, so that we get this little quote. I'm going to be putting in some quotes as we go. He smiled at me. If the whiskey holds out, you'll have a roof over your head in 2 weeks, Sassenach. I looked dubiously from the stone foundation to the cloud-flecked sky overhead. A roof? Well, a sheet of canvas, most likely, he admitted. Still, he stood and stretched, grimacing lightly. So he basically has enough help by all these visitors to be able to put a roof over Claire's head, he promises her, of some sort within 2 weeks. So now Claire sets about, she's making gallberry ointment for Lizzie, whose new baby is called Hubertus, which I think is funny. And then we get another recap of Joseph Winus's marriage to Monica. So far, we get a lot of recapping in this first section, a lot of recapping of things in this book, so far at least. And I get it has been 7 years since we had a book, but it's starting to feel like a little much, like every chapter is recapping a lot. So I hope that in time this lessens, and this is just kind of the thing that we get to start the book. Hopefully it will lessen a little bit after this first section. So Jamie asks her why she's using gallberry ointment. Doesn't she usually use Jesuit bark for Lizzie? And look at Jamie knowing his herbs, And she says yes, but she's been out of it for 3 weeks. And Jamie says, "Did you mention it to Roger Mack?" "No, why him?" I asked, puzzled. Jamie leaned back against the cornerstone, wearing one of those overtly patient expressions that's meant to indicate that the person addressed is not being particularly bright. I snorted and flicked the gallberry at him, and he caught it and examined it critically. "Is it edible?" Amy says, "Bees like the flowers," I added dubiously, pouring a large handful of the dark purple berries into my mortar, but there's likely a reason why they're called gallberries. So note the many little bees references that, we see woven in just casually throughout the whole conversations of this book. They're always kind of kept in the forefront and mentioned. He tossed it back at me and I dodged. "You told me yourself, Sassenach, that Roger Mack said to you yesterday that he meant to come back to the ministry." "So?" He went on patiently, seeing no look of enlightenment on my face. "What would you do first if that was your aim?" I scooped a large glob of pale yellow bear grease from its pot into the mortar, and part of my mind debating whether to add a decoction of willow bark, while the rest considered Jamie's question. I said in turn, and pointed my pestle at him. "I go around to all the people who've been part of my congregation, so to speak, and let them know Mac the Knife is back in town." Which I love. I love when she puts all the pop references in, pop culture references in. He gave me a concerned look, but then shook his head, dislodging whatever image I had just given him. "You would," he said, "and maybe introduce yourself to the folk who've come to the ridge since you left. And within a couple days, everyone on the ridge and probably half the Brethren's choir in Salem would know about it." He nodded amiably. "Aye, and they'd all ken that you need Jesuit bark, and you'd likely get it within the month." So I kind of love that. I love when Diana throws in the pop culture references. And so that is 3 references already to Visitations, to all the patients that came to the ridge, all the neighbors that came all day curious about the Macs and offering to help Jamie, and a reference that Roger will likely be visiting all of his old congregation and the new folk to let them know he's back. So we're already stocking up the Visitations, and we've only just begun. So now Jermaine pops in with a dead snake, another snake reference note, wrapped around his neck. And I hope this doesn't mean an omen for Jermaine. She better not be killing Jermaine in this book. I think that we've done enough damage to that family losing a son already. But he comes in with a dead snake wrapped around his neck. And he asks Claire if she needs Jesuit bark because a tinker will be visiting the ridge soon. Another visitor coming. And you know what? I just realized I'm doing this without my mic plugged in. Oh, my God, my God, my God.
Sorry about that. I'm going to just continue where I stopped and just kind of add it in because I don't want to redo it again. But I fixed I myself. Hopefully my sound is much better now. Sorry about the beginning being crumpy. So Jermaine comes in with his dead snake, and that Adso killed, and again another snake reference, and he asked Claire if she needs Jesuit bark because a tinker will be visiting the ridge soon. And so we have another talk of another person visiting soon. Jermaine is very impressed
by Jamie's leg that was all mangled by the bear. And Jamie's a little bit freaked by, he wants to show Jamie his dead snake, but Jamie, is afraid of snakes, but he's trying to look all, I'm the man to his grandson. And so he shows it to him, and Jamie's kind of like, oh, very nice. And he talks about using the snake skin to make a belt for Fanny. And wants to get like a buckle for it from the tinker. And so I think Jermaine is definitely crushing on Fanny. So cute. So as Jamie and Clara are discussing what to trade with the tinker and what they have that they can trade with the tinker, they get another visitor, a Duncan Leslie, with his two sons. He's brought a ham and offered it to Jamie for the arrival of his daughter's family, like to help out. And this ends up with plans with the Leslies to share it day after tomorrow, because tomorrow Claire is going to the Beardsleys. And so I guess this is the first that she's going back to the Beardsleys since the whole Lumpkin thing. But again, we see a little bit of a continuity error. Now, I'm noticing these more and more. I feel like I'm seeing these more in this book than I have in other books. Because so far I've seen quite a few. I've seen several already, and it's only chapter 8. So that's not, and I feel like, with all of the extra time it took, that should have been kind of bypassed, but I guess, I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully that gets better. Anyway, before it was a 3-day journey to go to the Beardsleys, and now she's going to be able to go up and back in a day. Like, does she have a bionic horse or something now all of a sudden? Anyway, I realize they have more people, but I don't think she's going to be going by herself, So we'll see how that, we'll see what goes on with that. But I definitely noticed a little continuity error there. So now we meet the Cunninghams. We're in we're in Roger's POV, and now Roger and Bree are going to visit the Cunninghams. These Cunninghams that were kind of alluded to by Amy to Roger, and now we're going to see them. And Captain, and these are quite interesting characters, the introduction to these characters, and I have a feeling they're going to play a lot in this story because we've seen them quite a bit in Daily Lines. Captain Cunningham is late of His Majesty's Navy. Now, I don't know if that means because he's supposed to be retired, or if he left because he was injured, or why the reason he left. I don't think that's made clear. And we meet but he's definitely still on their side. Like he's not like leaving because he's a patriot now. And his mother, who they call a basilisk, a formidable basilisk, Elspeth. And before they even approach Roger and Bree, they notice that this place is different. First, they have like this cleanliness and luxury about the place that you don't normally see in the backcountry, So you can tell that with these people, appearances matter. I feel like that's the message that's sending, is that appearances matter to them, how things look. You kind of get a feeling that maybe they might not be the same behind closed doors as they are in front of people from this. But appearances matter. There's and you also know that they get things that normally you wouldn't be able to get in this time because of his connections with the Navy and with the Army and all of that stuff, and with England. So right away they notice like there's really high polished glass on the windows, and the stones that line the wall are whitewashed so that they look real pretty. Like, this is a great scene, and there's some great dialogue in this scene. That's why I'm going to read a little bit of it. So Brianna says, who whitewashes rocks? She said, instinctively lowering her voice as though the cabin might hear her. Well, can't be someone with a lot of time on their hands, he said, half under his breath. So it's either a frustrated landscape designer or someone with a neurotic need to control their environment, Roger says, which I thought was funny. She says, I suppose there's no reason why you wouldn't find control freaks in any time. Brianna says. So that's very telling, I think, of the Cunninghams. So we find out that they are blue lights, which brings that word back into play, I think, for us as readers to get another like drop of that idea, but this way, but in this sense, it's in a different context, but it's still bringing that back into our mind. In this context, it means he was a naval captain that was a Methodist and would try to enlighten or hold services for his crew at sea, hence the blue, and him bringing light to them while they're at sea, blue, blue light. And Roger and Bree, they're dressed in their best. Bree is trying to look very proper, and I have to give her credit for holding her temper in this entire, Bree has come a long way, because normal Bree would have definitely went off on these people, but she's holding herself together. But she's looking all proper. She's got her little cap on, everything, to be the proper minister's wife. And before they can knock, the captain opens the door with no real sense of welcome about him. And Roger tries to introduce himself and Bree, saying they've recently come to the ridge, and the guy just cuts him off. I heard. The captain introduces himself and says, "Come in," and Bree tries to smile, and the captain looks at Roger like, are you okay with your wife smiling? Like, why aren't you keeping her in line? You're letting the woman smile and I'm a man? So I just thought that was funny. It's like, oh boy, welcome back, Max. So Bree steps in, trying to be all charming and compliment the house, and then she, capital S-H-E, emerges, and Diana says, a dark presence manifested itself before the hearth, and she capitalizes presence, like with a capital P, which is hilarious. I just thought that was so funny. And I can see why Diana has kind of indicated that she really had enjoyed writing this woman, and I can see why, Like I said, I give Brianna high praise here for her self-control, which is not usually her strong suit. So I'm going to go back to reading a little bit. She says, now it was Brianna's turn to blink. The preacher, are ye? Said the woman, looking past Bree. Yes, it certainly was a woman, though one nearly as tall as Brianna herself, and dressed entirely in black, save for the starched white cap. One of the severe kind with the ear lappets, which sounds very, what is it, what's the show I'm thinking of? Handmaid's Tale? With the ear lappets. She was old, but no telling how old. Her face was bony and sharp-eyed, and Brianna thought at once of the she-wolf who had suckled Romulus and Remus. I am a minister, Roger said, making her a deep bow. Your servant, madam. And what sect might you be, sir? The woman demanded. I am a Presbyterian, ma'am, Roger said. But are you? The woman said, fixed Bree with a sharp blue eye. Do you share your husband's belief? I'm Roman Catholic, Brianna said as mildly as possible. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last, but they had decided early on how to handle such questions. Like my father, Jamie Fraser. That reply normally took the questioner aback and provided enough space for Roger to take control. The non-Catholic tenants' respect for her father, whether based on personal esteem or merely the fact that he was their landlord, usually made them at least amenable to polite conversation, regardless of their general opinion of Catholics. The woman, Mrs. Cunningham, snorted and looked Bree up and down in a way indicating that she'd seen any number of disreputable women in her day, and was comparing Brianna unfavorably to the lot of them. She said, popery. We've nae truck with such nonsense and such things in this house. Mother, said the captain, moving toward her, I think that, ma'am, said Roger, stepping in front of Bree in order to intercept the eye of the basilisk being aimed in her direction. I assure ye, we have come neither to proselytize nor to convert ye. I'm Presbyterian, you say. The eye fixed on him, coldly accusing. And a minister? How is it then that you cannot keep your own wife in order? What sort of minister can ye be if you let your woman be a disciple of the Pope and roam about sowing and watering the seeds of wickedness and disorder amongst your neighbors? Mother, Captain Cunningham said sharply. Oh my God, she didn't flinch, but turned her stern face toward her son. You know it's true, she informed him. This lass, she nodded at Brianna, says that Jamie Fraser is her sire. That will mean, she looked directly at Bree, that your mother is Claire Fraser, aye? Bree took a deep breath of her own. The cabin was neat as a pin, but quite small, and the supply of air in it seemed to be shrinking by the second. She is, she said evenly, and she asked me to convey her regards to you, and to say that should any member of your family be ill or have injury, she would be happy to come and attend them. She is a healer, and repeated Mrs. Cunningham. I dare say she would, but she'll not get the chance, I assure you, girl. The instant I heard about the woman, I planted chamomile and holly around the door. Nay witch will set foot in our house, I'll tell you. Bree felt Roger's hand on her arm and gave him a cold side eye. She wasn't about to lose her temper with this woman. His mouth twitched briefly and he let go, not turning to Mrs. Cunningham, but to the captain. As I said, he said pleasantly, I've not come to proselytize. I am a respecter of sincere belief. I am curious, though. One of my neighbors mentioned the term blue light in reference to you and your family, Captain. I wonder if you'd be willing to tell me the meaning. Ah, said the captain, sounding cautiously pleased to be asked something that his mother couldn't take issue with. Well, sir, as you ask, it's a term by which such naval captains as promote the theology of evangelization upon their ships are known. Blue lights, they call us. He spoke modestly, but his head was proudly raised, as was his chin. His eyes, a paler version of his mother's, were wary, wondering how Roger might take this. Roger smiled. Are you a theologian of sorts yourself, then? So Roger starts chatting him up about what he's written and stuff, but pretty soon Mother Elspeth wants to seize control again of the conversation. She must be a control freak. I think Brianna pinned her right down. This woman is a piece of work. I mean, she's a piece of work. Right off the bat, man, we are just thrown right into this image of this woman, you know. She's going to be a pip through this book. I can see it already. It says, so as they're talking, it says, now we kind of get back into, now we're kind of flipped into Bree's POV. It says, Roger sounded honestly interested. Probably he actually was, Bree thought. But Mrs. Cunningham was plainly growing impatient with this amiability and meant to nip the conversation in the bud before Roger could seduce the captain into blasphemy or worse. The fact remains, Captain, that this gentleman's good mother is widely kent to be a witch, and likely his wife is one as well. Send them on their way. We've nae interest in their pretensions. Roger swung around to face her and drew himself up to his full height, which meant he nearly brushed the roof tree with his head. So I love this. I love when Roger gets his little angry edge going to him, you know. Mrs. Cunningham, he said, still polite, but letting a bit of the steel show through. I beg you'll consider that I am a minister of God. My wife's beliefs and her parents are as virtuous and moral as those of any good Christian, and I'll swear to as much with my hand on your own Bible if you like. He nodded to the tiny shelf over the desk where a Bible took the pride of place in a row of smaller books. Said the captain, with a narrow-eyed glance at his mother. I'm just away to call my 2 lads down from the field, sir. Lieutenants from my last ship, who's chose to come with me when I came ashore. I'll walk you and your lady to the head of the path, if you'll bear me the company that far. Thank you, Captain. Bree seized the chance for getting a word in sideways and curtsied deeply to the captain, and again, with as much face as she could manage, to Mrs. Cunningham. Do please remember that my mother will come at once, ma'am, if you have any sort of emergency. Mrs. Cunningham seemed to expand in several directions at once. Do you dare threaten me, girl? What? No. Do you see what you've let into our house, Captain? Mrs. Cunningham ignored Brianna and glowered down at her son. The last means to ill wish us. We have a few more calls to make, Roger interjected hastily. Will you allow me to bless your house with a wee prayer before we leave, sir? Why, the captain glanced at his mother and then drew himself up. Yes, sir, we should be most obliged to you. Brianna saw Mrs. Cunningham's lips shaped to say foot, but Roger hastily forestalled her, raised his hand slightly, bowing his head in benediction. So he says the blessing, and then he says, good day to you, sir, madam, and added quickly, bowing, grabbed Brianna's hand. She hadn't time to say anything, but just as well, she thought, but she smiled and nodded to the basilisk. I love how they keep calling her the basilisk, as they headed back out the door. Brianna says to Roger, so now we know what blue light means, she said, casting a ginger glance behind them as they reached the end of the path. As Mama says, Jesus H. Roosevelt Christ. Apt, Roger says, laughing. That whole scene was hilarious. I had to read it because the dialogue was so good. So Bree asks if Presbyterians believe in exorcism. So what an introduction to this colorful character of Elspeth Cunningham. Welcome back to the Ridge, Mr. and Mrs. Mack. So what did you all think of the visit to the Cunninghams and these two new characters that we were introduced to? Let me know in the comments. I'm kind of in on her. I mean, I'm in on her in a sense of she's going to add a lot of, like, spark, I think, to the story. But she is a piece of work. She's very interesting on the page. She has a lot of, I think she's going to have multiple sides to her from what we've seen a little bit, you know, like, we kind of get the sense, like, she has, like, this image, but then she's, like, a whole other thing going on with her, maybe. Because she puts so much effort into appearances, whitewashing stones, highly polishing things. I was cracking up. I may have to adopt foot into my vocabulary. So now we go back to Claire collecting plants and leeches by the creek when she encounters our next visitation. She hears wagon wheels and she thinks it's the tinker that Germain mentioned. But no, it's a rude dude who thinks he's all that, you know, he's dismissing Claire, you know, like she's nobody when she tries to find out who he is, what he wants, how can she help him type of thing. The wagon has guns and ammo and swords and scythes, so like that automatically disturbs Claire when she sees it. She tries to say, like, how can I help you? You know, what business, you know, do you have here? Is there someone you're looking for? You know, whatever. And this is how he comes off. He looked sharply at me and focused on me for the first time. My business is my own, he said, though not impolitely. I'm looking for Jamie Fraser. I'm Mrs. Fraser, I said, folding my arms. His business is mine. His face flushed and glowered at me as though he thought I was practicing upon him, but I gave him stare for stare, and after a moment he gave me a sort of barking laugh and relaxed. Will you fetch your husband then, or will I come and find him? Who shall I say is calling? I asked, not moving. Benjamin Cleveland, he said, swelling a bit with a sense of his own importance. He'll know the name. Well, aren't we, like, high on ourselves, Mr. Benjamin Cleveland? So Benjamin Cleveland is a real person, and a big guy, just like he's described. I have put a link to an article on him, and attached a picture below in the description of this live, so you can check that out if you like. So now we get back to Jamie, and we're back in his POV, and his POV here is really cute. In the beginning of it anyway, he's dreading having to finish all this chimney work on a ladder, and then he smiles thinking of Bree, and he says, and he thinks to himself, well, maybe my bonny lass will help with that. And he recollects the treasure of feeling her bump against him while they were walking the night before, giving him ideas to help with what she can build and what we can do. And he was real thrilled to have her say we, and he's just so happy that they're back. And now he sees Claire with Cleveland coming up the path, and his nerves go right on edge. And he says in Gaelic, Saint Michael the Angel, we are in a time of battle. And he starts to look around to gauge like what men are around him to help him that day, to see what kind of backup he has, in case he has problems with this guy, because he's getting a real bad vibe, a real bad, mojo off this guy. And so Fanny also picks up a vibe that the guy's bad news. And then he also notes Claire, and he says that her face was as transparent as a bottle of gin. And this chapter, I've noticed, has some excellent dialogue, and it has some excellent turns of phrase and similes and metaphors and stuff all sprinkled throughout of it. So I really like some of the writing of this chapter and some of the tools that she uses here. So we find out that he's known for his lack of mercy in killing Indians and Tories. And he gets Cleveland away from Claire. Like, that's his priority number one, to get himself between this guy and Claire. He don't like the guy being close to Claire. And he goes to look at the wagon that's damaged. And as he's going, Jamie is like sizing him up the whole time, kind of figuring him out, getting a read on this guy. And I love seeing him through Jamie's POV. And so we get to the wagon, and Jamie asks him point blank what he wants with him. What do you want with me? And here's another great line. It says, talking about Cleveland, his stomach strained the fabric of his hunting shirt, but it looked like hard fat, the sort that would armor a man's vitals, which I kind of love. And then you get this bit. He says to Jamie, heard a good bit about you these 2 years past, one way and another. Jamie says, folk who listen to gossip will hear nae good of themselves. Cleveland smiled in response. You'd be right about that, Mr. Fraser. Bending, he picked up the heavy iron strip as though it were made of dandelion fluff, and stood meditatively turning it in his hands. That's another great descriptive phrase, that he picked up this heavy iron strip like it was made out of dandelion fluff, which we totally can comprehend what that is. He says, there's a good bit of talk abroad about how you came to lose your army commission. So this little thread of conversation about gossip and about heard a good bit about you the last 2 years, etc., that feels like a very strong connective thread to the last chapter with Willie and Randall talking about the effects of gossip and reputation, which I thought was a really nice touch, because that chapter with Willie is kind of stuck in the middle of all of this Ridge stuff. I mean, I kind of looked, and it's the only chapter, I believe, in the first section that has Willie, anybody but the Ridge in it. Everything else is Ridge. So it's kind of like this lonely by itself chapter kind of wedged in to check in on Willie. And so it's kind of like we saw at the end of the chapter before Willie, we saw threads that kind of connected, because they talked about Willie at the end of that chapter to kind of smooth that transition. And now we get like this little nod back to some of the conversation that we just had in the Willie chapter about gossip and rumors and reputation, and how gossip can affect your reputation, whether it's true or not, and all that kind of stuff is kind of backed up with Willie's father in this conversation. So back to what it says. It says, despite himself, Jamie felt warmth rise up his neck. I resigned my commission, Mr. Cleveland. Following the Battle of Monmouth, I had been temporarily appointed as field general in order to take command of a number of independent militia companies. These disbanded following the battle. There was no further need of my services. Notice this entire conversation is yet recapping again within the text of within the text, and with like fitting it in, but it is still recapping information. I'd heard that you quit without notice, leaving half your men alone on the battlefield in order to attend to your ailing wife. Cleveland's bushy brows rose inquiringly. Though having met Mrs. Fraser, I can certainly understand your feelings as a man. Jamie turned to face him over the wagon load of muskets and powder. I've no need to defend myself to you, sir. If you've something to say to me, say it and have done. I've a privy to dig, which I love. I've a privy to dig. So Cleveland wants Jamie to raise his own private partisan militia, like some of the other backcountry men are doing at this time. And we get this very, like, apparently, there's like all of this stuff coming toward them, which we know. And then we get this very odd exchange. Cleveland verifies that Jamie was an Indian agent at one time. And then he says, is that true? Jamie says, I was. Cleveland says, and a good one by report. Cleveland smiled, suddenly clumsily playful. I hear tell there's quite a few red-headed children down in the Cherokee villages, hey? Jamie felt as though Cleveland had just struck him across the face with a musket. Was that really being said? Or was this some piece of foolery by which Cleveland hoped to involve him in something shabby? I wish you good day, sir, he said stiffly. My men will be down with tools to help mend your wheel directly. So, what the hell was that about? What the hell was that comment about? Okay, I mean, we know it's not true. We know Jamie has no illegitimate children, but why is he saying this? Like, what is he trying to say? And why did he come out with this here? Let me know your thoughts on that. So Jamie turns and starts walking back, but the dude, obviously, Jamie wants to be done with this conversation. But the dude stays right with him, whipping along, chucking along with Jamie, and he says, if we're to have a militia, we need guns. Cleveland said, that stands to reason, don't it? And then Jamie's just not answering him. And so he says, seeing Jamie wasn't disposed to answer rhetorical questions, he tried another tack. The Indians have guns, he said. The British government give the Cherokee a good-sized allotment of shot and powder every year for hunting. Was that the case when you were an agent? Good day, Mr. Cleveland. He walked faster, though the exercise was making his wounded leg throb. Cleveland grabbed his arm and jerked him to a stop. I mean, dude, that's Jamie freaking Fraser you're grabbing. Read the room, dude. He's lucky Jamie didn't just turn around and pop him, So Cleveland says, we can talk about the guns later. There's just one other thing I had in mind to speak to you about. Take your hand off me. The tone of his voice made Cleveland let go, but he didn't back away. So now Cleveland pretty much outright threatens Jamie threatens Jamie's loyalist tenants, specifically Cunningham, who we just met, right? He says, a man named Cunningham, he said, his small brown eyes steady on Jamie's, ex-Navy captain, a Tory, loyalist. That made a small cold hole in Jamie's middle. Captain Cunningham was indeed a loyalist. So were a dozen other of his tenants. I hate a Tory, Cleveland said reflectively. He shook his head, but Jamie could see the gleam of his eyes beneath his hat brim. Hung a few of 'em down home, put a scare into the others, and they left. He cleared his throat and spat, landing a glob of yellowish phlegm near Jamie's foot. Now, this Captain Cunningham writes letters, essays in the papers. Someone with the captain's welfare in mind might want to have a word with him about that, don't you think? So as much as I don't like this guy's whole manner about him, I do agree that having active loyalists as tenants will likely become a problem for Jamie. I really think this is going to be bad news for him if he continues like keeping them around, especially if they're out there writing pamphlets and papers and stuff. It's like making going to be causing division when all of this stuff comes into the backcountry, right? That we know is going to be coming. So he is going to have to deal with it somehow, some way. Eventually, that's going to hit the fan. I'm sure, because that's just like conflict brewing right there. So now Jamie comes back to the homestead, and you can almost feel him in his POV absorbing the comforts of home, and his family, trying to soothe this disturbing encounter that he just had. And Roger and Ian are there talking to Claire, and the kids are playing, and he's smelling something delicious cooking in the cauldron, and he remembers Jenny is coming for dinner, dum dum dum, again we get the dum 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 moment when he says that. And then he thinks to himself, someone with the captain's welfare in mind might want to have a word with him about that. Don't you think? He recalls what Cunningham said. This was not, in fact, bad advice, but knowing that didn't help his mood any. He disliked being threatened. He disliked being condescended to, and he very much disliked being loomed at by a man larger than himself. He didn't like Cleveland's news either, but he didn't hold the man responsible for that. So you kind of see him trying to absorb like the sense of home and the sense of everything to kind of calm his spirit a little bit. But as much as he wants to embrace all the comfort of home on hand there, of home and family, and rest his leg, the conversation, it says, was still boiling under his breastbone, and he didn't want to talk to anyone about it until he had parsed it out for himself. So he goes to work on his privy, and he thinks the effort of digging will calm him as he thinks things through. He hopes it does, right? And yeah, little does he know that Roger is about to come and visit and drop all his bombshells on him, So a chapter break here would have been very nice, Diana. Just saying. I always trust Diana has reasons for her choices. And I think I know why she might have made this one. She may have wanted us in the same headspace as Jamie, with all of this swirling around in our own heads and trying to process. Then have Jamie kind of come out of left field with all this dropping personal bombs on him. So I get maybe the thought process of doing it that way. If she's trying to put us in Jamie's shoes, so she keeps it all in the same chapter. However, not to get too far in the weeds to explain, I think if I was the author, especially in the way she crafted all these revelations, I think I would want them to have their own, all of this stuff, all of the different news and meeting these new people and all that stuff. I would want that to have its own weight and space. And I would definitely want all of this personal stuff with Roger and Jamie, and Jenny and Jamie, and Jenny and Roger, and all of that whole part. I think I would want that to have its own emotional space, rather than be tacked into the back half of a very large chapter after a lot of new information was dropped to process. Because you have to think about it. The reader has just met 3 new and intense characters with a lot of information, and potential ramifications to process. The Cunninghams, who are not only loyalists but actually served as a captain in the Royal Navy, and probably certainly has continued ties, in those circles. And he's staying active in the cause, apparently, according to this other guy, Cleveland. Plus, he, and especially his mother, have a dislike and distrust for the Frasers because they're Catholic. And they believe Claire is a witch, at least Elspeth does. And then you have Cleveland, who just dropped a ton of names. I skipped some of it, but he dropped a ton of names, threats, political machinations happening around them. And plus we had all the cute stuff in the beginning of the chapter. So as the reader, your mind is really very busy processing and comprehending all of this information, implications of it, the potential ramifications of it, all of this stuff. And so you're reading on with part of your mind distracted. And so all of the remaining chapters very highly emotional, very personal. And if I was the author, I would want my readers full investment and attention for it, rather than them still like processing something else, and then this whole big emotional moments being stuck in the end of a very complex chapter. I think that the benefit is worth a chapter break here. But that's just my own thought on it. Thinking in terms of a writer, giving you my thoughts in terms of a writer, but I digress. However, seeing where I am on time, I think I'm going to do a part A and part B on this chapter. I'm not going to be normally doing that, but I think for this chapter, it's necessary. So below, leave me your thoughts on these early encounters and visitations of this chapter. What are your thoughts on Cunningham and Benjamin Cleveland? What do you foresee coming down the road with them if you are new reading along with me? Don't forget I included some supplemental stuff on Cleveland in the copy below. Any thoughts on what Cleveland said to Jamie about the redheaded children, what that was all about, or thoughts on the cute beginning stuff? Let me know. I will be right back with part B, which was awesome. All right, talk to you soon.